G'day, fans, and we're back yet again on a Monday night. It's actually dark outside because the daylight savings is finally finished. We're back onto normal time zones. It's all very, very exciting. It's our second last episode before we finish up. And I'm here with the lovely Sarah, who's got some pair of eyes just checking me out, even as we speak. The old Ahsoka, she's doing a Quarto from Total Recall, if you remember that movie. So all she has to do is just start the reactor and it'll all be good to go. Sarah, how are you going?
I'm excellent, Dags.
I thought there was going to be more than that.
I'm sorry.
Chrissy's calling from waterlogged Gippsland. Oh, well, there you go.
Oh,
Make
dear.
sure you just get a big ass umbrella out there and see how you go. Chrissy's already asked, want more than two more? There we go. So, yes, absolutely fantastic. So I hope everybody enjoys the discussion this evening. Now, before we get into the really, really meat of what's going on, last week, for those who may not have been aware, we had a discussion about collectibles and collecting. And one of the things that Sarah said was that she was a really big collector of pop vinyls, right? And I collected pop vinyls left, right, and center, and the whole house is just invaded with them. So one of our regular viewers from the other show, The Vile, decided to put his thinking cap on. And Rod, your other half, is sitting downstairs at the moment watching this very episode. What will he think, or what will you think when this comes out? There we go.
Amazing.
How good is that, eh? So good on you, Sarah. As they always like to say, once you pop, you can't stop. So there you go. Look at that. Look, we've even got the box and everything. I mean, like in the version they did for us, we didn't even get a box. But and in fact, the Vile's actually with us tonight, which is absolutely fantastic. So yeah, what do you reckon there? So we need to put a call out to Funko to get this manufactured, or what?
It's beautiful. I absolutely love it. I am looking forward to it being mass produced and ending up as a shelf warmer in a local zing near you.
Absolutely fantastic. Yep, Christy's. Oh, look at this. Oh, here we go. And Rod, who, as I said, is downstairs. Oh my God, I love it. So, there you go. Very, very cool. So, yeah, good stuff. Now, tonight is an interesting sort of discussion because both Sarah and I are fans of this particular franchise. Daniel says, yeah, yes, that looks fantastic. And it does actually. It's very, very groovy. So what we're talking about tonight is, of course, is about good old Star Wars. And there's a lot of conversations you can have about Star Wars. But we decided to focus on this one. It's called Star Wars Beyond the Saga, wondering if the best years of the franchise are still to come. Remembering, of course, that Star Wars is now 45 years old. Holy guacamole, that was long. I mean, I was 10 years old when it came out, and you weren't even like a thought in your parents' mind at the time. So is that right?
Yeah, well, I'd assume so. They were busy doing other things.
Very, very cool. And if for those who are interested, I have actually done a bit of a discussion about Star Wars stuff before in January. So if you want to check this out on YouTube or the Facebook show, you can. My thoughts and views on the Star Wars saga. But before we get right into the guts of it, so just for yourself, when did you just very quickly, when did you get into the whole Star Wars fan phenomenon sort of like thing? When did it work for you?
When I properly got into it, would probably be around the time of Force Awakens. So I had been sort of on the fringes of the fandom. You know, I'd watched all the movies, you know, I enjoyed them. I played one or two of the games, but I hadn't really gone down the rabbit hole yet, so to speak. But really with the release of the newest trilogy, if you can call it a trilogy, I mean, but technically I guess it is. Yeah, that's really what sucked me in, and then from there I've just gone deeper and deeper down that rabbit hole into the games, the extended universe, the shows, the novels. Yeah, it's a very good time.
Good stuff. And I like what Ange said about your parents. They were too busy watching Star Wars. Yeah, exactly right. Exactly right. Now, last week we had a lot of people watching, and there's a lot of comments that came through, and we did end up missing a lot of them. So I do apologize for that. So hopefully this time around, I'll try and be a bit more on the ball, as it were. So, but this is definitely something which we are encouraging people to sort of put their thoughts and views forward, because the premise of the discussion tonight is like, the Star Wars saga is effectively the 9 films, right? Now, whether you agree with it or don't agree with it is completely irrelevant. Episode 1 to 9, right? And everything effectively revolves around the 9 movies, right, in the timeline. So you're looking at roughly 65 to 70 years from The Phantom Menace right through to Rise of Skywalker. And just about every movie and TV show we've seen so far. Now, we are sticking just purely with visual media. We're not talking about comics and novels and whatever else, have always fit within that time frame. And it's an interesting sort of point to say, well, okay, even the shows that are being produced currently are still within that era. And I do wonder if a time will come where someone branches out beyond that and says, no, we're going to go completely somewhere different. So there's no Skywalkers and there's like no Millennium Falcons and all this sort of business, and the Emperor's not a part of it. And if that was to be the case, would it work? Because where I'm coming from is that if you follow, say, the Star Trek franchise, Star Trek started off with the original series in the 60s, right? But when they did the shows in the 80s, they just bypassed that completely. They just went like, we'll go 100 years in the future. And the original series is barely referenced. But I find that with Star Wars, the 9 movies are the heart and soul of the entire thing. But does it have to be that way for the next 10 years, 20 years, 30 years, and whatever else? So while we wait for some people to sort of put their thoughts and views forward, what do you think? Do you reckon we're always going to be locked into that period between episodes? Like everything's just going to link back to it one way or another? What are your thoughts on the whole thing?
Look, I really hope not, because the universe of Star Wars it's a universe. It's huge, and it really limits and makes it feel small when we're just focusing on this one little pocket in time and this essentially one family and their personal drama. It kind of follows a bit of a soap opera model in that way, which, nothing wrong with that for the most part. But there is just it's such a deep well that is just ready to be tapped. And I would love to see something set in, say, we've got the games, but it would be amazing to see something live action in the Old Republic era, or even I know they've recently got novels set in the High Republic era and some comics. So like Old Republic or High Republic would be excellent. And just viewing that different view of how the Force does work in and around that universe, because we're all we really know about is how the Jedi deal with the Force, but it's a galaxy. There's different planets, there's different cultures, different people. Surely the Jedi's Jedi's and Sith aren't the only ones that have tapped into this power source and this source of all life. So I would really love to see some other alternate versions of Jediism, I suppose, for want of a better term.
No, that's fair enough, because it's interesting when you sit and look at what we've seen. There's a lot of what I class as fill-ins, right? It's like what happened in this period between here and here. And the Clone Wars animated series is a perfect example. That filled in that like 3-year gap. Kenobi, which is due out next month, that's filling in what happened with him in his 19-year sort of exile on Tatooine. Even things like Solo, Rogue One, they're all fill-in movies. There's nothing wrong with that. Now, we're not being critical by any stretch. They're absolutely fantastic. We love them and whatever. But it's interesting to say we're playing it safe. We'll fit within this particular time frame because it works with everybody. Even The Mandalorian is set in when the First Order are almost at that point of sort of coming into being. So it is interesting, and I totally agree with you. There's all this stuff to play with. But so far, everybody's keeping it relatively safe. Now, there's a lot of comments, and they're all long comments too. So I'm just going to start from the top, work my way down. So Thomas said, 1,000-year-old prequel or sequel years in the future and in completely different star systems would be awesome. It would be. Setting something in the same universe but in a completely different environment is a risk, because in the end, you'd have to ground it somehow rather to say, well, let's see, how can we make it all fit in the existing universe? Because one of the things that's happened currently, getting back to the Star Trek reference, is that Star Trek produced a series called Discovery, and it was so different that a lot of people just turned off from it, aside from the violence and some of the language and whatever, because they said, I can't relate. It might be set in the same universe, but it doesn't feel the same as the previous series, and there's lots of them, right? So to do a Star Wars series or a movie out in the middle of nowhere may have that risk of people saying, I get it, but I don't get it. So, but I see the point. James has said, will we get real look at the aliens in a 10th movie? Oh, well, there you go, eh? So there's always room for a CG alien. Rod, the guy sitting downstairs from you, the Skywalker had their shot and they pooched the whole galaxy, open up the universe. Yeah, I suppose that's a fair call. I mean, the Skywalker Saga, which originally started with one film, you got to keep that in mind, kids, and then it's just expanded out to what we've got, is the tentpole for the entire franchise, really. And it is interesting how everything sort of links back to that. It's that old gag of saying, oh, there's this great movie called Solo. With a bit of luck, we'll never see a lightsaber. And sure enough, we did at the end. So once again, linking it back to the original trilogy or the original saga. So what do we got here? Grave Digger said they're going to fill the 35-year cap between 6 and 7. When that is full, they'll do stuff after episode 9. Well, yeah, there's a lot in there, actually. That's between The Force Awakens. oh yeah, Return of the Jedi and The Force Awakens, you're right. There's a lot of untapped stuff there. But what we would like to see, possibly, I know what you think about this, is to say, no, don't do that. Just go completely left field. Or if it is in that time frame, it just sets somewhere out in the middle of nowhere, and it doesn't reference the First Order or the, Hosnian Prime or anything like that. What do you think?
Well, look, there was talk for a little while that Ryan Johnson, after doing The Last Jedi, was going to he was given a spin-off. So it was going to be Star Wars set in a new section of space. It was meant to be a trilogy. Unfortunately, it has been shelved. So that was meant to be set in a whole new era and a whole new section of the galaxy that we hadn't ever seen before. And it was promising to be something very different. And there was also the writers of Game of Thrones. One of the reasons the final season of Game of Thrones was so rushed was because they had a contract with Disney that they were going to make a show set in the world of Star Wars. Again, it was going to be something different, something completely left of center. And both of those projects, unfortunately, have been cancelled or shelved or iced. And it is a shame, because as much as I absolutely love what we're seeing at the moment. I love the Mandalorian. I love the Book of Boba Fett. I'm very much looking forward to Ahsoka, in case you can't tell. And Obi-Wan, who doesn't love a bit of Ewan McGregor? He's fantastic. He brings such joy to that role, and hopefully we'll see some Darth Maul and maybe some Crimson Dawn in there, which I'm very much excited for. But yeah, look, it is such a big universe, and yeah, the fact that we keep coming back to Tatooine. Like, one of my criticisms of when we were watching Book of Boba Fett was, a spoiler alert, there's at one point a Mandalorian, so not Django, Jin, he's coming back to Tatooine, and he gets a commercial freighter, and it's just like as if there's daily flights back and forth to Tatooine, and it's meant to be a really, backwater part of the universe, a backwater part of the galaxy. Nobody's going to Tatooine. Nobody would even think to go there. There's nothing to do there. And suddenly it's the center of a spice ring. It's very irritating seeing that. Like, I understand the nostalgia, the desire to dig back into that nostalgia and, mine it for content. But at the same time, it does kind of undermine, in a way, those original films where it was meant to be such a vast. It was a place that no one went. It was a place that no one would think to go. That's how Luke was able to hide there for so long.
Yeah, I actually think that's a very, very good point. And I have heard a lot of people who've said, yep, they love going to Tatooine because, hey, they're so familiar with it, but they hate going there because they're over it. And it is ironic, because when The Force Awakens came out and they set the whole thing on Jakku, and it's like, hang on, why aren't we on Tatooine? How many desert planets can there be in the universe? And if they had done that, Tatooine would have been in The Force Awakens. It's like, oh my God, people would have gone, no, not again. You can't win, I'll tell you what.
Too much.
Yeah. Christy said that she thinks that there'll always be a time of the originals for good or bad, and I get it, because it's a big unit. It's establishing the entire thing, and I'm very curious to see, because this is obviously a discussion for the future. Will there ever be something that comes out that uproots the center point of the 9 movies, and suddenly Star Wars, for a whole new audience, whole new generation, isn't the original 9 movies? It's now something else. And of course, that's predicting the future that may or may not come. But wouldn't it be funny, like, if 20 years from now, what's that, 2042, people say, hey, what does Star Wars mean to you? And they say, oh, it means this that doesn't exist yet. Whereas the original trilogy, the original 9 movies, the saga, which like bookended the entire thing for so long, is just a distant memory. So it'd be very intriguing to see if that ever happens. But I mean, there'll always be tenuous links, but I mean, will there come a time when they say, no, let's break away from it completely? We'll have to wait and see. Daniel said about an Old Republic show or series of movies would be fantastic. Yep, that's right. There's been a lot of discussion about that. And I think a lot of people are very keen on that idea too, which is kind of funny, because that actually leads us into what people were discussing years ago, was KOTOR, Knights of the Old Republic. And a lot of people, but I remember even back in the 1990s and the early 2000s, everybody was itching for a TV series or a series of movies based around the Old Republic set from this game. And obviously it hasn't happened, and you don't know if it ever will happen. And of course, they produced all the trailers for the games, and they looked absolutely fantastic. And it was almost like begging for it, but it hasn't actually occurred as yet. And I know that I'm sort of asking without sort of giving you pre-warning, do you think there would be a reason as to why Lucasfilm wouldn't be ready to make a movie or TV series based on that timeline?
Look, I think a lot of originally, probably at the time, they weren't really looking at making anything other than the prequels. So we've got to keep that in mind. But one of the reasons why KOTOR is sort of it's an interesting area, and I would love to see it. But one of the reasons why I think they're a little bit uncertain if they're going to go there or not is in many ways it very much mirrors the current timeline of Star Wars and what's happening in that universe. So essentially they basically were able to mine the original movies for all they were worth and create something that was basically the new movie, the prequels and the original movies, but 1,000 years earlier. And for that reason, while it's a very interesting area, it does mirror that other a lot more. And if you're going to do something that's so similar to the timeline, the established timeline, then I understand them kind of just going, why not just stick to the established timeline where we know that people are going to watch, we know people know these characters. It's less of a gamble, less of a risk. Whereas setting something 1,000 years in the past, it is a gamble at the end of the day. There is a risk factor because, what if people don't relate to the characters, if they don't like them? Well, it's 1,000 years before your favorite's going to be born. So how do they link that back? How do they really get us hooked on it without having us be, a playable character that, games are a completely different medium. And something that works in a video game won't always work in a film.
It's a very, very good point because when you do sort of like for fans, I mean, the fan base is X amount of people, hundreds of thousands, millions of people. It's great and wonderful, and they all tap into it straight away. And the Book of Boba Fett is a perfect example of that. Okay, all the fans knew about it; they just dialed in. No worries, even with the Mandalorian. But if you're an outside person who doesn't watch the season, the casual viewer, if you will, the casual fan, just goes to the movies, leaves it at that. And if something is set in a period in history, they go, "Oh, I can't relate." And there's a comment here from Christy, you need the familiarity of the Skywalkers, right? And I think that's right. And I think if you are trying to cater your product to the broader audience, not just the fan base, you are right. You do run a risk if you say, well, okay, I'm going to set it in a part of the universe where people just can't relate. And The Mandalorian was a perfect example of that because a lot of people thought, well, who's this guy? And what's going on with this? And what's going on with that? And it was only with the introduction of Grogu that brought the outside people in. So it's an interesting thing. But by the same token, the Skywalker Saga, that 70-year period, was just a bit of a blip in the history of the galaxy. So, it's a tricky one, and maybe someone somewhere will say, no, we'll keep it within this time frame because, as you said, it makes it easier for a brand new audience to relate to what's happening. And I kind of get that. So damned if you do and damned if you don't. But if ever a time comes and they go, no, we're going to go way in the distant future, like 1,000 years after Rise of Skywalker, wouldn't that be interesting to see, well, how have things evolved? But hey, it would be a massive risk, that's for sure. So especially trying to explain it to people as to what's going on. I mean, I don't know if you knew this, when Rogue One was coming out, a lot of people who weren't fans, like the general public, are saying, they've built another Death Star. It gets very, very confusing. Now we're just going to wind the conversation back a bit. Rod had made a mention about certain species are more force susceptible than others. Well, that would make sense. I mean, not everybody has a high midichlorian count, as was highlighted in The Phantom Menace. Gavin has said a long time ago, how far back in our years? I don't think it is in the past for us. I think it's in the future, or it could be set concurrently. It's just a term. It's a nice phrase, but it doesn't necessarily mean that it was Stone Age for us. But yeah, it could be. Who knows?
Yep. I mean, got to keep in mind, we've got the if you go by the Marvel model, it's the multiverse. It's a different universe that is going on over there while we are over here doing our thing. That's how I like to think of it, at least.
Daniel said about a series based on the Underworld of Coruscant. We almost had one back in 2020, 2010 with 1313, which was there was the game and the series that were all meant to go hand in hand. And for those who remember the Clone Wars episodes, the later seasons, which are all set in level 13, 15. That was all meant to happen. It was meant to be centered around Boba Fett, but it didn't get made because it was going to be too expensive. I mean, that was then. If they had the volume thing, which they have now for Mandalorian and Book of Boba Fett, maybe they could have made it. All the scripts were written. There's 50 of them apparently, but that would have been interesting. It was supposed to be a really dark, hard-edged show, but still set within the existing parameters of what we know. So it'd just be another show to add to all the shows, if that makes sense. Here we go. They're never going to do that. I forgot. I don't know which bit that was. Sorry,
Ryan Johnson.
Oh, okay. The backlash against Last Jedi was so vitriolic. They're going to see stuff and say, yeah, then we're going to see stuff with Saber. Yeah, it's a good point, and that's what we were sort of saying. It's not a bad thing. It's worth noting that it's not necessarily a bad thing, and there are certain characters you could say, oh, I'd love to know more about this person, what happens with them, whether it be after Return of the Jedi or before or in between or whatever. It's not a bad thing at all, as we're seeing with like Kenobi, as we're seeing with Andor and all the rest of it. And I think even Lando's got a show. I mean, it's all great. So we're not being critical of it at all. We are just curious to see that in the future, will there be a breakaway? Will there be a point where the 9 saga movies aren't considered the tentpoles of the entire franchise? So, whereas as of right now, they are. So there you go. Where are we? KOTOR works perfectly as setting for a video game and movies. Well, the trailers for a video game, for a movie or series, not so much. Okay, it's a fair call. I mean, I never played KOTOR. I assume you did. But I know a lot of fans were like itching for it. Now, to be fair, fans are easily sort of tempted. You just angle a carrot of any shape in front of them and they'll go completely apeshit over it. So maybe you're right. As a story, it wouldn't have worked. But I know a lot of people were sort of itching for it. Do you know much about Knights of the Old Republic at all? Do you reckon that would have worked?
Look, I haven't played the MMORPG. I've only played the original games. And yeah, look, it is just, while it is very interesting and a lot of what happens there, it really runs parallel in many ways. It's sort of that whole the future predicts the the past predicts the future type thing. And it really, the threads and themes through it a lot of the time are very parallel. So to what we do then get in our movies and TV shows that we are getting now. So that's the one real problem with going back to that world. Like, I think they could do it, but at the moment they're making so much money out of what I call the Filoni-verse. So everything Dave Filoni touches, which he has a very specific area that he's interested in. Just before the movie, it's basically after the prequels. Between the prequels and the original films, and between the original films and the sequels, or at least that's currently his focus. And as long as they're mining that and making money off that, I don't think we're going to see anything KOTOR in a bigger budget format, at least not yet.
No, that's fair enough. So the fans will just be left, or the amount of fans who really into this stuff will be saying, they go, oh, give me a KOTOR show. And you're right, maybe it's a good idea, maybe it's not a good idea. But either way, it's not happening at this stage. Deb, good to see Deb join us. Has encouraged people to go back and watch TCW. Well, it does, because some people, they do want to sort of see more about the history of things. And that's one of the advantages of shows like that. And I mean, all things being equal, it is an animated series and not everybody watches cartoons, as it were. But I do agree that, I mean, that was a perfect example. And I think it was probably the first example of an on-screen fill-in between this period and this period, what happened in between. And the Clone Wars, when they produced that, not the original version from 2002, but the 3D animated series, was fantastic. But not every fan watched it. As I said, a lot of people said it's the cartoon, they're not into it. But if you want to fill in the gap of what happened in those 3 years, absolutely spectacular. And I think that's why you can play it safe and live within the existing confines of what you've got. And most people will accept it, enjoy it, as they should. There's nothing wrong with that whatsoever. Now, DJ Graves, this is where I disagree, which is fine. There's no such thing as a casual fan. There are millions of involved fans and a lot of cutting from get your profit. I totally agree. There are millions of Star Wars fans out there, millions upon millions. There's no denying that whatsoever. But as any company will ever tell you, having your core audience base is fantastic. What you want is to go beyond that and reach those who aren't part of the thing yet. And you've got to cater for that, right?
Yeah.
And as I mentioned earlier, the best example that came out recently was The Mandalorian with Grogu, right? Now, I watched The Mandalorian, the first episode of season 1 with my other half. She was tuned out halfway through. So I was completely lost interest, wasn't buying it, right? Boring as far as she was concerned, right? Even though as fans were like, oh my God, this is great. As soon as Grogu appears, bang, outside people are getting involved. There are people who know jack shit about Star Wars, but they know about Grogu. And that was a deliberate way of getting people from the outside sucked in. So if you've got 100 million fans, you want 101 million fans or 200 million fans and all that sort of thing. So, there are people out there that still say, I don't like Star Wars. So how do you bring them in? And that's what we're sort of discussing.
I think
what do you reckon?
We all need to remember that a company like Disney, they are in the business of making money at the end of the day. And making money means improving and increasing their market share. That means converting new fans. Now, it is actually one of some of my criticisms of some more recent things that have come out in the Star Wars universe is actually that they're not a jumping on point. So something like the Book of Boba Fett, unfortunately, it's not really a great jumping on point if you haven't watched all of the other stuff that's going on. You need to watch Clone Wars, you need to watch Rebels, you need to watch Mandalorian, you need to watch all of the movies, well, at least all the movies up until that point. You don't really need to have watched the sequel trilogy, but still, that's a lot of content that you have to have consumed. Yeah. And to the average person that's, trying to jump in on that can be really intimidating to, it's like, when somebody's like, I want to get into comic books. Where do I start? You're like, well, if you'd like to read this, you need to read this and this and this and this. And it's overwhelming. It's just a lot.
It's very interesting you should say that, because I saw someone or met someone recently who said that they'd only watched one Star Wars film, just one, and it was The Phantom Menace. It took a while to work out which one it was, right? And this was a young person. So there always is new people out there who are getting into it. Now, as like DJ Graves said, I mean, there are 100 million fans, so you could almost say, look, just cater for the fans and you're done. But eventually, as the years roll on, the decades roll on, you've got to bring in new people. You just have to, and they eventually replace the old people. I know about this because I'm as a 50-something-year-old, I'm getting replaced by all these younger people like you, for example, and and that's not about. And that's just the nature of how these things work. And you are right. Ultimately, it's a business, because if the franchise stopped, it's hard for people to understand this. If Lucasfilm stopped today, Disney stopped today, and they said that's it, no more, we're packing up, going home, right? And Star Wars came to a halt within 4 years. The franchise would be starting to crumble. People would be losing interest, moving on, as DJ said here about moving on to Marvel. You don't have to read all that, but that's what I'm sort of referring to. So they've got to keep the thing going. And this is history repeating itself, because 5 years after Return of the Jedi came out in 1983, by the mid-late 80s, Star Wars was a dead franchise. No one gave a shit about it except the hardcore fans. And the same thing occurred after the prequel trilogy. So after 2005 with the Revenge of the Sith. 5 years after that, no one gave a shit about Star Wars. It had died in the ass. And the Clone Wars was the only thing around. But once again, it was a cartoon show. So it's easy to realize that, yes, no matter how big something is, it can peter out if no new material is being produced. And it's intentional. So I'll get to you in a sec. Yeah. Clearly, they're producing material that is, they're playing it safe, which is not, as I said, not a bad thing.
You always get shows that, get the cult status. And Star Wars, if they'd never made any other Star Wars, those original films, they would have cult status. People would still watch them and love them, and people would find it on their own. And so you look at something like Firefly, that's a good example. One very short season, you still have people joining in, you still have new fans coming along, but when you're not making new content, after a while, there's not a lot to be a fan of. You can be a fan and discuss fan theories and fan fiction and fan films and things like that, but when you're not actually getting new content, it slows down how much you can be an active fan in that community. And I think that's a very that's something you really do need to keep in mind for something like Star Wars, that they're kind of going the opposite. So something like Firefly, which had so few episodes, and then you've got something like Star Wars, where they just keep pumping out more and more and more. For something like Star Wars, they have committed to the money making model for that, and so they are wanting new fans to come in wherever they can. They're getting people to play Jedi Fallen Order, so that's the video game fans come in. You get people, you've got all the comic books coming out. You get your comic fans coming in. You have the Mandalorian, you get the Baby Yoda fans coming in. And all of those new people, they then often will go back and watch those original films, because they need to understand where it all started. And that's actually, I think, a thing that a lot of people forget, is when people are criticizing new media and they're like, oh, it's getting too far away from the roots of it and what it originally was. You've got to remember that those new people coming in, they all are going to want to know where it started, and they will go back to that original source material. And honestly, that's a good thing. That is a good thing, not a bad thing. So, I just hope that, they keep making stuff that isn't too insular, to the point that it's only catering to existing fans but not converting new ones, because that's where fandoms go to die, at least when you're looking at big empires like what they are building. They are the empire, honestly. Let's be real about it.
True. Because you're in the middle of a massive and a really, really good point, I'll overlook the fact you said Baby Yoda, because that to me is just like, you might as well just use the F word on this show. It's just like, it's not freaking... Yeah, when the president of Disney gets told off not to say Baby Yoda, it's actually called Grogu. Yes, there you go. But that's right. I'll let you off the hook this time around, which is all right. Speaking of which, Kevin's asked, here's one for you. Would you like to see the background of Ahsoka? Which you probably will in the Ahsoka series because she's getting another series. But,
look, I would like to see that, but at the same time, I don't need to know who her grandparents were. Like, that's, you know, I need to know who she is, where she came from. It would be interesting to know how she became, you know, got sent off to become a Padawan. All that's interesting, but I don't need to know who her grandparents were. That's not necessary for me to enjoy something. And I think that is one of the problems with Star Wars is they do a lot of everything is related to bloodline. And, you know, you don't need to go down that path. If you have a compelling character, people will like the compelling character, whether or not they're related to anyone or not.
Very good stuff. Aaron has made a point about love to set something the eras they love until they make something that they don't like when they complain everything is too incestuous. I know it's very interesting because familiarity is fantastic. Everybody loves familiarity. Okay, they've done it, which is kind of ironic because they did a film about Han Solo, the history of Han Solo. Now, by default, that should have been like the biggest, most successful Star Wars film of all time, right? Not because of what it was, but the fact that it's based on this character that everybody loved, right? And yet either a lot of people didn't see it or didn't like it or weren't interested. And I can't work that one out because you're thinking Solo. I mean, it's almost like if they made Solo in 1985, assuming they could make it look as good as they did when they produced it here, it would have been the biggest thing ever because Solo was such a popular character, and yet it sort of didn't work. And I can't figure that one out. So
there is something to be said about oversaturation, and oversaturation of the market, especially if a film is unsuccessful. It came off the back of Last Jedi, which was a less successful Star Wars film. It was still a very successful Star Wars film, but it was less successful, especially in a lot of international markets. A lot of people were burned out. They'd just seen that. They'd seen Rogue One. They'd had enough for the time being, and they kind of just wanted a break. So a lot of people did skip it, especially when, you know, unfortunately Disney was doing some very weird stuff with that one where they were, you know, letting out press releases telling how badly the production was going. They were, you know, they were leaking a lot of information about how it was doing badly. So a lot of people just went, oh, I won't watch that. It's a train wreck. But the movie itself, in my opinion, is actually a really, really great film. I know that not everyone likes it. It's not everyone's cup of tea, but that's fine. There's something out there for everyone. But it's very sad because so many people did skip it because, you know, again, it's just the market.
So we just talked about we're just going to deviate to the whole Grogu thing for a sec. Gavin has said cuteness brings in suckers. I like that one. Rod said Grogu was like the Woolies Lego. It got the normies on board. But Deb said, no, she disagrees. People entered the Star Wars at the Mandalorian and they moved to Boba Fett and now keen to know more. They still love it without the background knowledge. And that's fine. And you are right. Once people are sort of like taking a step down, taking their first step into a larger world, you're right. And this is what you said. You know, people want to sort of learn more. Oh, well, this is awesome. I want to know more of this and more of that. I mean, the whole thing of the prequel trilogy was about that. Oh, I know what happened about like Vader was Anakin Skywalker. What was his history? And that was what all that was about. So if you didn't want to know the history, you just didn't watch it. But obviously, it was very appealing to a lot of people. Where I was coming from is that it doesn't take a genius to work out Grogu was added in. He could have easily looked like a horse's ass for anybody who wanted to do that. But no, he had to play the cute factor to bring in outside of people. And I saw it firsthand. And I've seen people wearing Grogu T-shirts and they got the Grogu merchandise. None of that happened by accident. That was deliberately designed that way. And it worked, and good on them too. So I'm not being critical of that. And if that got the people into the franchise, and now people say, well, I've seen this, I now want to see that. Yay, team. It's obviously done what it was meant to do. And that's the reason why Grogu came back in the book of Boba Fett. Oh, my God, he's only been gone for like 5 months. Holy shit, got to bring the cash cow back in. And, you know, we won't go down that path.
At the end of the day, Star Wars will exist always to sell merchandise and toys. That is one of the biggest appeals of that thing. And it's one of the reasons Disney ended up buying it from Lucasfilm. They knew that was a cash cow right there. They saw the original collectors and how everyone just goes crazy for Star Wars and merch. And if you can merchandise that right, you are going to make a lot of money. And that's just something we've got to keep in mind.
And good on them too. I mean, it was ingenious and it worked. And anyway, it sort of, where it's all gone from there. Alan, it's good to see Alan joining us. There is enough variety for fans to pick and choose the shows they like. That is very, very true. The transits, I think they should be made for them. Well, that is very, very true. The Star Wars franchise, unlike most other franchises of just about anything, even like your other Star Trek and Doctor Who and even Harry Potter and all that, is picked to the shithouse whenever anything comes out. I would hate to personally work for Lucasfilm having designed the latest poster for a movie because 50 million fans are going to tear it to shreds the second it gets put online and redesign their own version. It's amazing how criticized the entire franchise is, to the point where people actually lose focus as to what it is. It's just a friggin' set of movies and TV series. That's it. And I find it intriguing that people who are supposed to be fans and loving this stuff actually turn against it, turn against the people who are making it, turn against the people who are in it. And you go, what's wrong with you people? What's wrong with this picture? So I agree with you, Alan. Sometimes a bit of time apart is not a bad thing. And if someone said at Lucasfilm, because as you know, they're churning all this stuff out, if they said, we're going to take 5 years off, we're just going to let the dust settle for a little bit, just show to people that, yes, you can have a bit of a break. Whereas currently people think, it's for me. And if I don't like it, well, then I've got a reason to really crack the shits over it. No, that's a whole other discussion. So,
that is a
normal fans don't do that. If they see something they don't like it, they say, yeah, okay, I like this part, I didn't like that part. They'll explain why they didn't like it, but that's okay. They won't start hanging shit on the people who made it. So, anyway.
Don't go to the midnight screening of a movie when you're not going to like the movie. It's just leave it to the people that you think are going to like it, and go see it. Go see it in the next screening. Just
Yeah, exactly right. Back to Solo. Solo, such a shame that Solo's a good movie. Explain some background. Yeah, exactly right. And it was meant to have sequels, obviously. And in terms of filling in a backstory, it was fantastic. I want to know the backstory of Han Solo. I don't know anything about him, nothing. I mean, forget the novels from the 80s. And it was excellent in that regard. And if anything, it could have been a stepping stone to other things. So, but yeah, okay. Daniel agrees with you. Disney didn't help. We all know about what happened in regards to its production and promotion and all the rest of it. So, So, Solo was popular. Tentpole movies. George Lucas was a genius for merchandising, and Disney is overdone. Oh, well, I guess, Anyway, so we're heading towards the end of our discussion, and we don't want to get into nitty-gritty details about this movie or that movie or whatever else. But I'm intrigued to see where now, as we know. So I'm just going to backtrack. Lucasfilm mentioned last year, the year before, they're pumping out all these new movies and TV series. A couple of them aren't going ahead. I think Rangers of the New Republic's been shelved, and second season of Boba Fett, I think, is on hold or whatever. So obviously it's not all going to happen, but there's a lot that is coming out. I'm very intrigued to see what happens 10 years from now, 2032. The franchise will be 55 years old. I believe there will come a time where somebody out there will say, nah, I've never seen the original trilogy, don't know anything about it. For me, the sequel trilogy is my Star Wars, or The Mandalorian is my Star Wars, or whatever else. And that is going to happen. That is just the nature of progression, the nature of things growing up and moving on and maturing. And even though it's like one day, and it's hard to fathom this, one day somebody will say, never heard of George Lucas, don't know who he is. It's like, we've seen this with Gene Roddenberry. Gene Roddenberry obviously passed away in the 90s. A lot of fans, Star Trek fans, we wouldn't know who he is, a lot of modern day ones. So that will all happen. We have to sort of just grow and go with it. And interesting times ahead. What are your thoughts?
Yeah, look, you are completely right. It will come a time where, if the fandom will either die or it will outlive us. And that's the question. Every fan's got to ask themselves, do they want the fandom to die with them? In the way that, still the same thing that they fell in love with when they originally, saw the movies or the TV shows or whatever it was. Or do they want it to, be there for their kids and their kids' kids? And, do they, it really comes down to that. If we are looking at media in that really broad, huge format that media is these days produced, it can only really go one of two ways. It can either keep going forever and it will change because it has to, or it will stay the same and eventually die.
And that's a funny thing, because if they do move off into different stories and someone somewhere takes the punt and say, yeah, let's set it on the completely opposite side of the universe, like something in the outer rim, right? There's like a foreign planet, foreign society, not even related to like what we know in the saga stories, and it works. And that alone could start off a whole new franchise over there. And the word Star Wars is sort of just gets filtered out of it. Yeah. And it doesn't even get mentioned anymore. It might be in like inverted commas. It's the show's called blah. And it's just got like in the Star Wars universe. And people go, well, I've never, wouldn't that be bizarre if that happened? But it certainly could.
In the immortal words of Kylo Ren, let the past die. Kill it if you have to.
Yeah, and it is kind of funny because people like myself who's been fans for a long time, you see it goes like this. The franchise is so popular, and then it dies out for so many years, and then it comes back and it dies out for so many years. I've just got a couple of things I've got to plow through very fast. It's kind of a separate issue. We've now got a whole industry of people whose literal full-time job being outraged about the current state of Star Wars. It's kind of sad, isn't it? I mean, if you were to say, "Oh, I'm a fan of the Back to the Future franchise," I mean, everyone loves that. There's no criticisms for that. No people tearing that to pieces. So, and just quickly from Deb, so sad how some people call themselves fans but tear apart they allegedly love. That's exactly right. They're not true fans. Yep. And I agree with you completely. And that's where the social media things come in. We've got Pussycats on the camera, which is awesome. You had mine last week, because you got yours this week.
Yep.
And one thing I do know. Splinter of the Mind's high page turners, they were not here. Very good. One thing that is interesting, and you mentioned it right at the start of the show, we're going to finish up in a second. They are now dealing with the High Republic timeline. Now, it's just books at this stage. And for those who don't know, that's about 200 years before the Phantom Menace. So they're finally starting to dabble in pre-saga territory, which I think is actually kind of groovy. And of course, that leads into one series they are producing that is set back there, and that is called The Acolyte. And that is set during the High Republic. This is before the Phantom Menace. So none of the characters we know, assuming even like Palpatine, won't exist at this point. I reckon that's a great idea. I think it's fantastic. And it could be a very interesting sort of stepping stone to say, yes, we can do things before the saga, even though things will lead into the saga, that sort of open up a new sort of realm of possibilities. And I think that's, of all the series they've announced, that's one I'm very, very intrigued to see what they do with it, because the Jedi are at their full power. Nobody knows that the Sith exists at that point, and to see what they do with it, even though there are dark force users out there. So what are your thoughts on that?
I'm very interested in that. I don't know a lot about it, but I'm just from the title alone, I'm hoping it has something to do with Night Sisters, or you know that particular cult, because it's just excellent. That's other stuff in Star Wars that's very different from the Jedi. I'm so sorry, Valkyrie is just really wanting to hog the camera right now.
That's right.
And look, I am really looking forward to seeing what they do with it and those little gambles they take out of it. So, very much Disney is currently following the Marvel model with Star Wars. They're starting to take risks and calculated going outside. Basically, we're at the post MCU time for Guardians of the Galaxy point, where they're going to start making a couple of weird choices. We're going to get Guardians of the Galaxy and Ant-Man, but in Marvel form. And I'm looking forward to seeing what they do with that.
Very cool. DJ, I know the Acolyte will be about young Palpatine, and if so, that'd be fantastic. And I've always wanted to see something to do with Darth Plagueis, and that would really push my buttons.
Darth Plagueis the Wise, the tragic.
Yes, young Sheev. Yes, get a bit of Sheev. Although, did you know his actual name is Frank? Because he said, "I must be Frank, Your Majesty." So there you go. And with that on, we're going to wrap up now. Next week is our last episode, and guess what? I'm not even going to tell you what it is, but it will generate a lot of discussion. I tell you what. Oh my God, it'll get fans like foaming at the mouth. Almost like that caddy is almost like right now, which is particularly groovy. So you'll have to join in and tune us there. Forget about the whole, it's dark now, stay inside, watch our show. Sarah's last time on this series, at least for the time being. And it should be very, very groovy. So you're going to have to make sure you check that out. Any final words before we wrap up for the night, Sarah?
Not particularly, just Valkyrie says she loves all of you, except she also hates all of you. So, the mind of a cat.
Absolutely love it. All right, we'll see you next week, guys. Party hard, rock on, and we will see you then. Okay, remember, Star Wars actually forever. Fantastic. Leave it to it. Bye-bye.